My name is Hildegard Carson, 32 years old, and I never thought I'd witness my own father betray the man who gave him everything. Grandpa Arthur, a billionaire with a heart of gold, trusted Dad with $58 million for his care. That trust was shattered when Grandpa was cruelly kicked out. What happened at the will reading still gives me chills. The truth that came to light that day changed our family forever. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how justice finally prevailed. Growing up, my relationship with Grandpa Arthur was something truly special. He wasn't just any grandfather. He was a self-made tech billionaire who built his fortune from nothing but a garage startup in the 80s. Despite his wealth, he remained humble and dedicated to his family. I still remember our Sunday morning pancake traditions, where he'd create ridiculous shapes while telling me stories about his early business days. Our family had always appeared perfect from the outside. My father James, mother Eleanor, brother Michael, sister Amanda, and me. Dad worked in finance but never achieved the same level of success as Grandpa, which I think always bothered him deep down. Mom was obsessed with maintaining appearances in our affluent community, often spending beyond our means to keep up with neighbors. In the beginning, Dad and Grandpa had a good relationship. Dad was the only son, and Grandpa had high hopes for him, taking over portions of his business empire. I remember countless dinners where Grandpa would mentor Dad on investment strategies and business ethics. But as years passed, their relationship grew increasingly strained. The tension stemmed from fundamental differences in their approach to money and business. Grandpa built his wealth through innovation and treating people fairly. Dad wanted shortcuts and quick returns. Their disagreements during family holidays became legendary, with Mom usually pulling Dad away before things escalated. Despite the growing family tension, I maintained a close relationship with Grandpa. During college, I'd visit his sprawling estate every few weeks, just the two of us having lunch on his terrace overlooking the ocean. He'd ask about my studies in business management, genuinely interested in my perspective on new technologies. Those conversations shaped my career path more than any university course. Everything changed when Grandpa was diagnosed with Parkinson's 3 years ago. The symptoms progressed faster than doctors initially predicted. His hands trembled more each time I saw him, and his once powerful stride became a careful shuffle. Despite this, his mind remained incredibly sharp, perhaps even more perceptive than before. As his condition worsened, I noticed him becoming increasingly wary of certain family members, particularly my father and mother. He once confided in me, "Hildegard, not everyone sees me anymore. Some just see dollar signs when they look my way." The sadness in his voice broke my heart. Maria, his personal assistant of 20 years and closest friend, shared similar concerns with me. "Your grandfather is worried about who will truly care for him as things get worse," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "He's afraid of becoming a burden, but also of being taken advantage of." That spring, Grandpa made a decision that would set off a chain of events none of us could have anticipated. He called a family meeting at his estate, his voice on the phone unusually formal as he said, "I need to discuss my future care arrangements with everyone present." The family gathering at Grandpa's mansion had an unusual tension. His grand living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific, felt smaller somehow as we all assembled. Grandpa sat in his favorite leather chair, his lawyer Thomas Stevens standing beside him with a briefcase. Maria hovered nearby, concern etched on her face. "Thank you all for coming," Grandpa began, his voice still commanding despite his physical decline. "As you know, my condition is progressing. I've given careful thought to my future care, and I've made my decision." We all leaned forward as he continued, "James, I've decided that I want to live with you and Eleanor." Dad's expression shifted from surprise to something I couldn't quite read. Satisfaction, perhaps. What came next stunned everyone. "To facilitate this arrangement, I've already transferred $58 million to your account, James. This is for necessary renovations to accommodate my needs, my ongoing medical care, and compensation for the disruption to your lives." The room fell silent. $58 million. Just for taking care of Grandpa. My sister Amanda shot a look at her husband, clearly calculating what they had missed out on. Michael's jaw physically dropped. Dad recovered first. Dad, I'm honored by your trust. We'll make sure you have the best care possible. Mom nodded enthusiastically beside him, but I caught the gleam in her eyes. I knew that look. She was already spending the money in her mind. Grandpa then outlined the specific terms which Thomas had drawn up in detailed legal documents. Dad would renovate their home to be fully accessible, higher qualified nursing staff and ensure Grandpa maintained his dignity and independence. In return, the money was his to manage, with the understanding that a significant portion would be used for Grandpa's care. Mom immediately started talking about the necessary renovations to their already massive home. We'll need to completely redo the east wing, of course, and the pool area should be more accessible. Grandpa nodded along, but I noticed he was watching Dad's reactions more than listening to Mom's plans. The renovation that followed was nothing short of extravagant. Dad's colonial-style mansion was transformed within 2 months. They added an elevator-widened doorways, installed a state-of-the-art medical suite, and completely redesigned the garden with accessible pathways. But they also added features that had nothing to do with Grandpa's care. A new home theater, a wine cellar, and Mom got the kitchen remodel she'd been wanting for years. When Grandpa moved in, there was a catered welcome party that felt more like a society event than a family gathering. Grandpa seemed pleased with his new suite, which admittedly was beautiful, with a private sitting area bedroom and adapted bathroom overlooking the garden. The first few weeks went relatively smoothly. Grandpa settled into a routine, the hired nurses seemed competent, and Dad made a point of having breakfast with Grandpa every morning. Mom hosted lunches to show off the renovation to her friends, parading Grandpa around like an accessory that had garnished them this windfall. I visited at least twice a week, and at first Grandpa seemed content. "They've done a nice job with the place," he told me during my third visit, but then he lowered his voice. "Though I sometimes feel more like a guest than family here." By the fourth week, I started noticing concerning changes. The nursing staff hours had been reduced. Some of the specialized equipment Grandpa needed was often being serviced. And most troublingly, Grandpa was increasingly alone in his suite, while my parents were frequently out at social events or shopping trips. During one visit, Grandpa confided in me, "Your father seems to think the money was a gift, not a trust for my care." His eyes, still sharp despite his physical decline, held a mixture of disappointment and something that looked like calculation. "I've started keeping a journal, Hildegard. Just notes, you understand." The first major conflict came 6 weeks after Grandpa moved in. I arrived to find him sitting alone in his room, no nurse in sight, his lunch tray untouched. When I questioned Dad about it, his response chilled me. "He's becoming difficult, Hildegard. Demanding. Nothing we do is good enough for him." Dad's tone had an edge I'd never heard before. Besides, he gave me that money to use as I see fit. If I decide we can cut back on some unnecessary expenses, that's my decision. What had started as occasional neglect soon became systematic. Over the next few weeks, I watched in horror as Grandpa became increasingly isolated in my parents' home. Dad canceled Grandpa's weekly chess club meetings, claiming they were too disruptive to the household schedule. His longtime friends stopped visiting after Mom complained about all these elderly people tracking dirt through my newly renovated home. Even Maria, who had been like family to Grandpa for decades, was told her visits needed to be scheduled and limited because Arthur needs rest. The irony wasn't lost on me when on the same day Maria was turned away, Mom hosted a loud luncheon for 20 women from her country club. Meanwhile, Dad's spending had become outrageous. A brand new Bentley appeared in the driveway. Mom started wearing jewelry I'd never seen before. They took a much-needed weekend getaway to Monaco, leaving Grandpa with a single nurse who I later learned had been instructed not to allow any visitors. Grandpa's health began declining more rapidly. When I mentioned that his tremors seemed worse, I was told that the doctor adjusted his medication. But when I asked to speak with this doctor, Dad was suddenly too busy to provide contact information. I later discovered that they had switched from the specialist Grandpa had been seeing for years to a general practitioner who was a golf buddy of Dad's. "They've changed my medication," Grandpa whispered to me during one visit when we finally had a moment alone. "I don't feel right, Hildegard. My mind gets foggy now. That never happened before." I confronted Dad that evening, my anger finally boiling over. What's happening to Grandpa's care plan? Why change doctors without consulting him? And where are the full-time nurses that were part of the agreement? Dad's face hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "I don't need to justify my decisions to you, Hildegard. I'm his son, and he put me in charge. The money is legally mine now, and how I manage his care is none of your business." Mom sided with Dad, of course. "Your grandfather is just getting older, dear. This decline is natural. James is doing his best, but we have our lives too. We can't be expected to put everything on hold." I tried bringing in outside help. I contacted Grandpa's original neurologist, but was told they couldn't discuss another doctor's patient. I reached out to Maria, who tried to visit again but was turned away at the door. I even consulted with a lawyer about the terms of the agreement, but without access to the original documents, there wasn't much that could be done. Grandpa, despite his increasingly managed state, was still lucid enough to recognize what was happening. During one visit, when he seemed clearer than he had in weeks, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I'm not as helpless as they think," he said quietly. "I've contacted Thomas. Just needed to confirm some suspicions. You've been my eyes and ears, Hildegard. Thank you for that." Before I could ask what he meant, Mom entered the room with a falsely bright smile. "Time for Dad's medication," she announced, shooing me out of the room with a practiced efficiency that left no room for argument. 3 days later, my phone rang at 11 at night. It was Maria, her voice tense and angry. "They've thrown him out, Hildegard. Your parents have actually thrown your grandfather out of the house." I broke every speed limit driving to the Four Seasons Hotel where Maria had taken Grandpa. I found them in a luxury suite. The hotel staff had recognized Arthur Carson and given him their best accommodation despite the late hour. What I saw broke my heart. Grandpa sat in an armchair, still in his pajamas, with just a light jacket thrown over them. His face was pale, his hands trembling more violently than I'd ever seen. But it was the look in his eyes that gutted me, a mixture of profound hurt and cold anger. "Hildegard," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I'm sorry you have to see me like this." Maria filled me in while helping Grandpa with some tea. "They told him he had become too much trouble. Your father said the money was compensation for future care, not a guarantee of indefinite housing." Her voice shook with barely controlled fury. "They packed a single bag for him called a car service and had a staff member escort him out. They wouldn't even drive him themselves." Grandpa finally spoke, his voice steadier than I expected. "James said I had become inconvenient to their lifestyle, that my medical needs were more extensive than they'd signed up for." Eleanor stood behind him, nodding, wearing diamond earrings I'm quite certain were purchased with my money. The most chilling part was his description of my father's final words to him. "You should be grateful we took you in at all. The money was payment for our trouble, not a rental fee." I immediately drove to my parents' house, demanding an explanation. The confrontation in their marble foyer was ugly. He was becoming impossible. Dad insisted, not even looking ashamed. Complaining about the care questioning where the nurses had gone, demanding to see his old doctors. "After all we've done for him," Mom chimed in, "we fulfilled our obligation, Hildegard. We provided a beautiful home for him. It's not our fault his expectations were unreasonable." When I mentioned the $58 million, Dad's face hardened. "That was compensation for taking him in and for the extensive renovations we made. It's legally mine now." He signed the papers. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "He's your father. He trusted you." "He's a bitter old man who can't accept that he's not in control anymore," Dad shot back. "He got what he paid for, a few months of premium care. Now he can use some of his other millions to bother someone else." I left shaking with rage, knowing there was only one place Grandpa could go. My apartment wasn't fancy, but I had a spare bedroom and more importantly, a genuine desire to care for him. When I offered Grandpa's eyes filled with tears, "You shouldn't have to bear this burden, Hildegard." "You've never been a burden, Grandpa. Not to me." The family fractured in the days that followed. Michael initially sided with Dad, believing his story that Grandpa had become irrational and ungrateful. Amanda waffled, uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to jeopardize her standing with our parents and potential inheritance. Dad's threats came by text. "You're making a serious mistake taking his side. Remember who controls the family money now. This won't end well for you." After settling Grandpa into my apartment, he revealed something that sent chills down my spine. "I suspected something like this might happen, Hildegard. Your father's character has always had flaws. I prepared for this possibility." He wouldn't elaborate further except to say that Thomas had everything in hand. Despite the trauma he'd experienced, Grandpa maintained his dignity and even his sense of humor. His health stabilized somewhat in my care, with proper medication restored and regular visits from his original specialists. 3 weeks after moving in with me, Grandpa passed away peacefully in his sleep. The doctor said it was his heart. The stress of recent events had simply been too much. I held his hand as the color faded from his face, thanking him for everything he'd taught me, especially in these final, difficult months. The days after Grandpa's death passed in a blur of grief and practical arrangements. I insisted on handling the funeral myself, wanting to ensure it reflected who he truly was, rather than the sanitized society version my parents would have preferred. The service was dignified but personal. Jazz music, Grandpa loved stories from his oldest friends and business partners, and blue hydrangeas everywhere his favorite. Dad and Mom attended, of course, keeping up appearances. Dad even gave a brief eulogy that made my blood boil with its hypocrisy. "My father trusted me with his care in his final days," he said solemnly to the gathered mourners. "A trust I honored until the end." Throughout the reception, Dad seemed oddly confident. Despite what had happened, he moved through the crowd accepting condolences with an air of entitlement. I overheard him telling Michael, "The reading is just a formality. Dad and I had an understanding about the estate." While sorting through Grandpa's belongings the next day, I found a leather journal hidden in the lining of his suitcase. The entries documented everything: the gradual reduction in his care, the medication changes, the isolation from friends, the financial discussions he'd overheard between my parents. The final entry, dated just before he was thrown out, read, "James has failed the test. Hildegard remains true. Thomas has my instructions." I didn't know what the test meant, but I was about to find out. Thomas called me the following morning, his voice carefully neutral. "Your grandfather left specific instructions for me. I've scheduled the reading of the will for Friday at 10. Everyone should attend." When I asked what to expect, Thomas paused before answering. "Arthur made certain preparations. That's all I can say for now." The next day brought an unexpected discovery. Maria called, her voice excited. "Hildegard, you need to know something. Arthur had security cameras installed throughout his suite at your parents' house, and audio recording devices. He never trusted your father completely. Those recordings were automatically uploaded to a secure server." Dad must have sensed something was coming. He called each family member before the reading. When he reached me, his tone was surprisingly conciliatory. "Hildegard, we've had our differences, but we're still family. I hope we can present a united front at the reading, for the family's sake." The veiled threat was clear: get in line or be cut off. I later learned he'd promised Michael a significant director position in whatever companies he inherited, and had assured Amanda that her children's education would be well provided for. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and clear. I arrived at Thomas's downtown office early, my stomach in knots. The reception area gradually filled with family members, Michael and his wife looking nervous, Amanda checking her phone repeatedly, distant cousins and a few of Grandpa's oldest friends. My parents arrived last, Dad in an expensive new suit, Mom wearing what looked like freshly purchased designer clothing. Neither spoke to me directly, though Mom gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. At precisely 10 o'clock, Thomas appeared in the doorway. The Carson family. Please follow me to the conference room. Thomas's conference room was imposing, all dark wood and leather with views of the city skyline. A large screen was mounted on one wall, currently blank. We all took seats around the massive table, an empty chair at the head, symbolically left for Grandpa. Thomas began with the standard legal preamble, then moved on to specific bequests. Various family members received items of sentimental value or modest financial gifts. Maria was given a generous pension and Grandpa's vacation home in Maine. Several charities received substantial donations. Throughout these initial bequests, Dad became increasingly fidgety, clearly impatient for the main event. Mom kept patting his arm reassuringly, whispering, "Soon, darling." Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. Now, regarding the bulk of the estate, including Carson Technologies and all associated holdings, properties, and financial assets. Dad sat up straighter, a smile beginning to form. Thomas continued, "Before I reveal the final dispositions, Arthur requested that a video statement be played." He pressed a button on a remote, and suddenly Grandpa appeared on the screen looking directly at us. "If you're watching this," Grandpa began, "then I've passed on. What you learn today may shock some of you, anger others, but it reflects my final wishes based on careful observation and consideration." Grandpa's image looked straight at the camera. "James, my son, I gave you an opportunity, $58 million, and the chance to care for me in my final days. This was not an impulse decision or a gift. It was a test." Dad's face drained of color. "I needed to know who could be trusted with my legacy," Grandpa continued. "So I created a scenario to reveal everyone's true character. The money transferred to James was never a gift, but a trust with specific conditions that were clearly documented. The video cut to footage clearly taken from hidden cameras in Dad's house. There was Dad discussing with Mom how they could cut corners on Grandpa's care. Another clip showed Dad telling a nurse she was no longer needed because they were streamlining the care plan. Most damning was footage of the night they forced Grandpa to leave Dad's cold voice saying, "The money's already legally mine. What are you going to do about it?" Horrified gasps filled the room. Mom clutched Dad's arm, her knuckles white. Michael stared at the floor, unable to watch. Grandpa's face returned to the screen. Documentation of financial exploitation, medical neglect, and breach of contract has been provided to the authorities. James, the $58 million was never yours to keep. My actual agreement, which you signed but clearly never read, carefully specified that the funds were to be held in trust for my care with detailed accounting required. Upon any breach of the caregiving agreement, all funds must be returned with interest. Dad half rose from his seat. "This is ridiculous. I have the transfer documents." Thomas calmly slid a folder across the table. "The complete agreement with your signature on all pages, Mr. Carson. As you'll see on page 12, paragraph 4, the funds were never an unconditional gift." Grandpa continued, "As for my actual estate, I have established the Arthur Carson Foundation for Elder Justice, dedicated to protecting seniors from financial abuse and ensuring proper care for those who can't advocate for themselves. The foundation will be directed by the one person who proved worthy of my trust, my granddaughter, Hildegard." I gasped, completely blindsided. "Hildegard." Grandpa's image said, his eyes seeming to look directly at me. "You showed compassion without expectation of reward. You fought for me when it wasn't convenient. You are the true inheritor of what matters most, not just my wealth but my values." Dad exploded out of his chair. "This is outrageous. I'm his son. She manipulated him when he was vulnerable." He jabbed a finger at Thomas. "I'll contest this. I'll sue everyone in this room if I have to." Thomas remained unruffled. "I would advise against that course of action, Mr. Carson. The evidence of your misconduct is substantial. Should you pursue litigation, it will become public record. Additionally, there's the matter of criminal charges for elder abuse and financial exploitation that the district attorney is currently reviewing." Dad stormed out, dragging Mom behind him. The rest of us sat in stunned silence until Thomas gently continued with the remaining details of the foundation and my new responsibilities. The fallout from the will reading was even more dramatic than I could have imagined. Dad's legal challenges failed spectacularly. The contract he'd signed was airtight, and the video evidence left no room for interpretation. He was forced to return the entire $58 million plus interest and narrowly avoided criminal charges only because Grandpa had indicated in his final wishes that he preferred restitution over prosecution. Our once close-knit family splintered along clear lines. Several relatives, including some cousins who had always envied Dad's position as the favored son, cut ties with him completely. Others, mostly those who benefited from his generosity over the years, stood by him despite the damning evidence. Michael initially sided with Dad out of some misplaced family loyalty. "He's still our father," he insisted during a heated phone call. "Everyone makes mistakes." It took months before he finally watched the complete video evidence Thomas had provided. The man I saw at the coffee shop 3 months after the will reading had red-rimmed eyes and a humbled demeanor. "I didn't want to believe it," he admitted. "I'm sorry I didn't stand with you." Mom's transformation came more slowly. At first she backed Dad completely, even helping him draft statements to family members painting Grandpa as mentally unstable and me as an opportunistic manipulator. But as Dad's reputation crumbled and their social standing plummeted, cracks formed in her facade. She appeared at my door one rainy afternoon 6 months after Grandpa's death. "I knew," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "I knew what James was doing was wrong. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that I was just being loyal to my husband." She didn't ask for forgiveness, which was perhaps the beginning of earning it. Dad remained the only family member who refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. His last message to me, left on my voicemail late one night, revealed a man I barely recognized. "You think you've won taking what should have been mine. Your grandfather was a manipulative old man who couldn't accept that his time was over. You're just like him, calculating, always playing the long game. Enjoy the money. It won't make you happy." I deleted the message without responding. There was nothing left to say. The Arthur Carson Foundation for Elder Justice became my life's work. Using Grandpa's fortune, we established programs to detect elder financial abuse-trained advocates for seniors without family support, and funded legal aid for victims seeking justice. Our first major initiative created a network of certified elder care homes with transparent practices and strict oversight, everything Grandpa should have had in his final days. Despite the family trauma, there were unexpected positive outcomes. I developed closer relationships with relatives who had previously been just Christmas card acquaintances. Maria became like a second mother to me, her wisdom and steadfast loyalty a constant reminder of what true family looks like. The most surprising relationship that blossomed was with my sister Amanda. Initially cautious around me after the will reading, she eventually admitted that she'd been uncomfortable with Dad's actions all along, but had been too afraid of his anger to speak up. "I was a coward," she said during a long lunch, where we truly talked for perhaps the first time as adults. "You showed me what courage looks like." My personal healing took time. For months I woke from nightmares about Grandpa being thrown out alone and betrayed. I questioned whether I could have done more sooner. Therapy helped, as did pouring my energy into making the foundation everything Grandpa would have wanted. 2 years after Grandpa's death, I scattered some of his ashes off the Maine coast near his vacation home, now a retreat for caregivers of chronically ill family members. As I watched the ashes merge with the sea, I finally understood the most important lesson Grandpa had taught me. Family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by how we treat each other when it matters most. True wealth isn't measured in millions or property holdings, but in knowing who you can trust when you're at your most vulnerable. Grandpa didn't just leave me a foundation, he left me the wisdom to recognize the difference between those who love you for what you can give them and those who love you for who you are. I still haven't forgiven my father. I'm not sure I ever will completely, but I've learned that holding on to anger only gives him continued power over my life. The best revenge, if you can call it that, is living well and using Grandpa's legacy to prevent others from suffering as he did. Have you ever had to stand up against family for what's right? It's one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also the most necessary. Leave a comment below sharing your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family justice and healing. And if you know someone who might be facing elder abuse or financial exploitation, share this video. It might give them the courage to seek help. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most important family isn't the one you're born into, but the one you choose to create.